Ghastly here. This is part 2 of a 2-part story. If you've not listened to part 1, you can find the link in the video description. Consider liking the video if you enjoy this story. It is the best, and it's a free method to support my work. Thank you, and let's get into the story. After watching Ava's car leave his small lot, Sheriff David decided to head back inside. He figured he needed to check in with Deputy Williams and let him know about the odd conversation he just had about the stranger in town. He honestly couldn't get a read on the situation. As far as he could tell, the guy hadn't done anything wrong. However, Ava seemed so genuinely concerned, almost certain that something bad was going to happen. In his experience, when people are that certain about an approaching disaster, they're either mentally unstable or know something that no one else has figured out yet. David got the feeling that Ava was not crazy. Picking up his cell phone, he scrolled through his contacts until he found Williams. It was most likely nothing, but better to have someone double check it. To his surprise, he didn't pick up. Odd, he always kept his phone on him when he was on patrol. He redialed his number, but once again only got his voicemail. Going to his side desk, he turned the power knob of his two-way radio. "Williams, do you copy?" Still no answer. Suddenly, Sheriff David had that feeling in the pit of his stomach, that persistent sting that something was wrong. A stranger in town, and now Williams was not responding. It felt like it had to be connected. David opened his laptop and began looking through the recent missing persons reports. Ava was certain that the young boy she met was in danger, but maybe he had been taken from a different town. Typing in the name Johnny Harris in the search field came back with a match. Reading over the report, the color drained from his face. The kid and his parents both went missing a few weeks back, and now, according to Ava, he was in town. David didn't know how she knew, but it was enough to get him involved. He turned off his radio and closed the laptop. Moving over to the sink, he splashed a bit of water on his face. Shaking off the water droplets, he reached for the coffee cup on the edge of the counter. A faded image dotted the cup, but multiple washes and uses left it unreadable. At one time, some deeply insightful phrase was displayed, but time had taken its meaning. It was still his favorite cup, but he could not remember the phrase. Another purpose lost to the stream. Taking a drink from his cold coffee tasted terrible, but he needed the caffeine right now. He needed to find that white van and get this sorted. David had a feeling it was about to be a long night. Ava turned off her car's headlights as she went down the dirt road. It made it difficult to see, but she speculated the element of surprise was her best play. In the distance, she could make out a faint light coming from the rental cabin, and off to the side was the white van. Ava pulled her small vehicle off the dirt road and parked next to a grouping of trees. As she stepped out of the car, she pressed her body weight on the door to close it. Had to keep quiet if she was going to get Johnny unnoticed. Walking up to the property, she suddenly became aware of how utterly unprepared she felt. The plan that had formed in her mind made the task seem cartoonishly simple. Sneak up, find a way inside, save Johnny, then get crowned the local hero of Polk. But the reality was far from this vision. Every sound from the woods put her on edge. The assortment of coins and forgotten objects in her purse jingled with every movement, threatening to reveal her location. Ava felt like she was going to be caught any minute, and she could not slow the thunderous pace of her heart. Reality is far less clean and a hell of a lot scarier. Reaching the back door of the property, Ava gave the knob a slow turn. However, the mechanism stopped before it could complete the rotation. Locked. She should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Ava went around the property, attempting to push open a window, but everything was latched down. Moving around to the side of the cabin, she found another door that she attempted to open. This one was locked, but it felt less secure. Inspecting the door jamb, Ava could see a bit of light escaping through the frame, and it didn't have a deadbolt. Fishing into her purse, she pulled out her debit card and slid it in between the door lock and the frame. With a slight push, the mechanism failed, revealing the cabin kitchen. Ava put away her debit card and grabbed a small container of pepper spray. Her grandma had insisted she carried it with her when she worked late nights, but she had never felt the need to carry it until now. Before entering the house, Ava hid her purse in a small brush next to the door. The rattling change and baubles were too loud for this task. Stepping inside the cabin felt immediately uninviting, like she had wandered into a wolf's den. The part of her mind that could channel the gift was throwing every alarm it could send at Ava. She pushed the feeling away. She had to be brave. If her heartbeat was fast before, it was a percussion solo for a metal band now. The smell of bleach and other chemical cleaners filled the air. The mix of aromas was nearly overpowering, burning her nostrils with each intake of air. Every surface looked unnaturally clean. Ava's mind raced with images of terrible events that had been hidden by the sanitation process. Small goosebumps formed on her skin at the thought, but she continued. She had to press forward. The living room was dark, and the faint sounds of classical music hung in the air. Looking into the room, Ava could see a cell phone was plugged into the speaker system, shuffling through a playlist of tracks. Once her eyes had adjusted to the lack of illumination, she spotted him. Sitting in the recliner was the dark outline of the Thin Man. He was slouched in the chair, his knees pointed up to the ceiling from his legs being too long. Ava froze in place, her mind scrambled to decide on the next action. Half of her brain screamed fight, the other protested to flee, leaving her anchored to the floor. Then the sound of a slight snore broke the paralyzing moment. The Thin Man had fallen asleep in the chair. Ava's body allowed her to breathe again and move from the spot. Creeping quietly past him into the hall, Ava could see 3 doors. She assumed that the one at the end was the master bedroom, so Ava picked the first door on the right. Her intuition told her that the Thin Man would keep his hostage near him, and the right door was near the master bedroom and the living room. Looking into the room, Ava could see the outline of a boy laying on the bed. His arms were up in an awkward angle, holding onto the bed frame. As Ava approached the sleeping child, she could see duct tape had been used to secure his arms to the frame. She gave him a slight nudge and whispered, "Wake up, Johnny." He took in a sharp breath of air, and his eyes opened wide, like he was expecting something terrible to happen. His eyes met hers, and his expression changed from terror to confusion. Ava put her finger over her mouth to remind him they had to be quiet. It took a few seconds for Johnny to respond, but finally he whispered, "Is the man still here?" Ava nodded her head in response. "Is he a family member?" asked Ava. Johnny shook his head. "I don't know him. He took me from my home." Ava reached for her purse, but remembered it was left at the door. She cursed herself for leaving her cell phone outside. If she had thought to bring it, they would be a phone call away from help. The next best option was to sneak out with Johnny, and then they could call the police from the safety of the road. "I'm going to get you back home," replied Ava. She started looking through the room for something she could use to cut the tape off Johnny's hands, but it was pretty much empty except for the bed and a dresser with a lamp on it. "I gotta find something to cut the tape. Be right back," whispered Ava. "Don't go," said Johnny with a bit of fear in his voice. Ava pressed her finger on her mouth to remind Johnny. "I won't leave you. I'm just gonna search some of the other rooms. I'll be right back." Johnny nodded with tears running down his cheeks. Ava could tell that this ordeal had taken a mental toll on him, but kids are often more resilient than we notice. Ava went back into the hallway and weighed her options. Going into the kitchen, she could get a knife to cut the tape free, but she would have to sneak by the Thin Man again. She really wanted to avoid that route. Instead, she opted for exploring the other rooms. Opening the door on the left revealed a small bathroom. Sitting on the counter was an old barber's razor. Inspecting the blade, it appeared to have been well maintained. Ava's gift suddenly sent her a flood of images that disturbed her to the core. The razor had been used on multiple victims to make their last moments slow and painful. She shuddered at the revelation, but picked up the razor anyways. Then it dawned on her how strange that moment was for her. When did her gift start giving her more than people's names? Was the fear and stress helping her channel it? All good questions she could explore when she was out of this situation. For now, she needed to focus on getting Johnny free. Once Ava was in the room with Johnny, his face lit up. He must have worried that she was not coming back, she thought to herself. Getting out the blade, Ava began the process of cutting the layers of duct tape. It was slow work, but it appeared to be doing the trick. She had to be careful in the dark not to accidentally cut Johnny in the process. Without telling him, he seemed to understand that he needed to be still right now. After what felt like an eternity, the duct tape finally snapped, freeing Johnny's hands. He got up off the bed and hugged Ava. It was a tight embrace that felt prolonged in the moonlit room. After a few moments, Johnny let go to look up at Ava. "Are your parents here?" asked Ava. Johnny nodded his head and pointed out the window towards the van. She saw a brief image of the corpses laying under a tarp. Ava had hoped that maybe they would still be alive too, but her gift answered the question. Inspecting the window, she searched for a lock. On the frame was a latch that came undone with a bit of pressure. A faint screech came from the mechanism as the latch moved. It felt like any noise was deafeningly loud in the room. Ava and Johnny both sat on the bed, listening for any movement in the room over. Confident that the thin man was still asleep, Ava pushed up on the frame to open their path to escape. Throwing open the window caused a gust of wind to come through the room. It felt liberating to smell the outside world again, free of the suffocating chemical smell. She motioned for Johnny to go out first. He crawled through the opening with little effort and landed ungracefully on the ground below. An adult would have been laid out for some time with a fall like that, but Johnny bounced right back up on his feet. Kids really are more resilient than we notice. Ava went next, taking a bit more time to make sure she didn't repeat the kid's fall. Just as she was about to bring her other foot around through the barrier, it got stuck on something. Suddenly, she was rocketed back inside the house with a great deal of force. Her head hit against the top of the window, causing her vision to blur from the thunderous trauma. Her mind attempted to make sense of why she was back in the room, laying on her back. Finally, her sight locked onto the thin man standing over her, a mask of frenzied fury painted on his bony face. The thin man slammed his boot into her stomach, expelling all the oxygen she had in her lungs. Her body tried to recover the lost air, but she could only grab small breaths every few seconds. Satisfied that she was not going anywhere, the thin man ran towards the window, looking out into the moonlit lawn. He slammed his hand on the wall, causing the drywall to crack. "Where is he?" shouted the thin man. Ava could not catch her breath to answer, but could only shake her head in response. Good, the kid got away, but how is she going to get out now? She attempted to roll over and get on her feet, but her body hadn't recovered from the hit. As much as she wanted to stand, it was not possible. A boot shoved hard on her back, forcing her to the floor. Ava's face smacked the wood, causing her to taste a bit of iron in her mouth. Looking at the side of the floor, she could see a pool of blood beginning to form by her face, and her nose throbbed from the strike. "Not to worry, I'll find the boy, but let's talk about you first. I could tell you noticed me at the store, and no one ever sees me." Ava managed to spit out the words, "You don't have a name." The thin man considered the response, moving his switchblade back and forth between his hands. "Sure, I have a name. I have lots of them. In Georgia, they call me the Atlanta Ripper. In Florida, it's the Bayou Slasher. My personal favorite came from the fine people of Philadelphia. They called me the Count on the fact that I drain the bodies of blood after I'm done with them. I have names, but what I want to know is how you knew about me." "I know monsters when I see them, and I knew Johnny was in trouble," said Ava through clenched teeth, still trying to get out from under the thin man's boot. "Oh, you know Johnny?" asked the thin man. a mask of amusement taking over his face. "Why did you take him?" The thin man pressed his boot into Ava's back with a bit more force, leaning the bulk of his weight on her. She cried out in pain as the heel dug into her flesh. "Guess you're asking the questions now. Well, I will oblige. Most people don't take an interest in the why of my craft. They just ask, why me?" said the thin man with a chuckle. "Here it is. I actually hate children. Can't stand them. But something about them disarms most normal people. I walk up to somebody on the road and they're instantly on edge. But if I have one of those youngsters with me, suddenly I become one of you. They make great camouflage for my work. Only problem is that you gotta train them not to run away. Looks like I got a bit more work to do with Johnny. Now, my guess is that you came here to get Johnny. Well, if you wanted to take part in the party, all you had to do was ask. But I don't like uninvited guests." Ava managed to turn over and saw the thin man holding a blade in front of him, preparing to sink the knife into her. She knew this would be her only chance to get out alive. Bringing up the can of pepper spray that she had been hiding under her body, Ava pressed in the red cap. A jet of chemical agent shot into the thin man's face, causing him to step back from the attack. Wiping at his face only intensified the burning sensation that assaulted his eyes and lungs. Howling from the rage and pain, the thin man lunged forward with his blade in hand. Ava managed to roll to the side, just in time to avoid a clumsy stab. The spike of adrenaline gave her the ability to move again. Her throbbing head and bloody nose suddenly seemed not so bad. A last-ditch effort to defer death's icy clutch. His blade slashed blindly towards her, but failed to find its mark. Laying on her back, she brought up her foot and rocketed it towards him, Ava desperately trying to create some space from her attacker. Her shoe connected with the side of his head, causing him to fall onto the wooden floor. Although the strike was successful, the knife managed to cut her leg as it retracted back, a coat of red already soaked into her pants leg. Ava got back on her feet and ran into the hallway with a trail of blood behind her. Get to the kitchen, get your bag, get Johnny, and get to the car, Ava thought to herself. Escape had to be the focus. She was pretty certain she would not win a prolonged fight with the thin man, even if he was half blind. Her run had become an awkward hobble as she made her way to the front door. The knob turned, but the door remained shut. Struggling to discover the locking mechanism in the dark room was already problematic, but the knowledge that the thin man was just behind her compounded the difficulty of the task. Her hands fumbled over the deadbolt, turning it and opening the door in one swift motion. As Ava was on the verge of stepping out into freedom, suddenly her head was thrusted into the doorframe. The staggering blow caused her legs to buckle under her body's weight. Ava's vision narrowed as she collapsed onto the floor. The last thing she saw was the hilt of the knife colliding with her face. Then the world went dark. Slowly her vision returned, but the scene made little sense. She was looking at a white tile and a light painfully bright overhead. Her head throbbed and screamed in protest as she forced her eyes to stay open. Then the sound of falling water filled her ears. Turning her head, Ava could see the thin man was scrubbing his face with dish soap and rinsing it with water, attempting to find some relief from the spray. Ava tried to put her hands under her body to get up, but discovered that they were stuck behind her. Duct tape had been used to restrain her arms and legs, making it impossible to do little more than move her neck around. The thin man's head snapped towards her, like a snake that had just caught sight of its target. "Oh, welcome back to the party. You got me pretty good back there. You have a lot more fight than I gave you credit for. A minor miscalculation on my part." He stood up from the bathwater and grabbed Ava by the arms, dragging her over to the edge of the tub. "You know, I almost stabbed you back there, but changed my mind in the heat of the moment. It didn't seem fair to let you out that easy. You disrupted my work, my calling. I can't find the boy, so now I'm going to leave the state early. Abandon my van and set up shop somewhere else." The thin man forced a smile on his face that almost looked genuine, but a faint hint of anger still remained. Ava attempted to respond, but discovered that tape had been placed over her mouth. "You see, I'm a prophet, and I've come to spread the word. The word is that good and evil don't exist. There is no law save for natural law, and every person I convert proves that the good of this world left a long time ago, if it ever existed. So, before I go, I'm going to perform a baptism to convert you. The moment the water starts to fill your lungs, you'll know the truth too. Looking at the cold tub of water that was slowly filling up engulfed Ava with dread. Her mind raced for a solution, a way out, but it was impossible to move, to break away from the thin man's grip. Then a knock echoed through the house, coming from the front door. The thin man released his grip, causing Ava to collapse on the floor by the bathtub. "Make a sound and I'll kill whoever's at the door, and that'll be on you," showing Ava the pistol he had under his shirt. The thin man left the bathroom, closing the door behind him. She tried to get her arms free, but the tape was wrapped too tightly. Ava could hear the thin man talking to someone at the door. Her gift reached out beyond the walls, seeking a name. It came back with Elijah. Sheriff David had found her. She didn't know how, but she had to warn him. Her heart skipped a beat as the bathroom door slowly crawled open. But instead of the thin man, Johnny came to the door with a straight razor in hand. He started sawing on the duct tape, just like he had watched Ava do in the bedroom. Her hands came free as the tape broke, and she took the blade from Johnny to start working on freeing her legs. She could not express in words how grateful she was to Johnny in the moment. The only sound she could make was a light sob, not one generated by fear or dread, but from the reappearance of hope. Breaking free, she got back up on her feet. She ripped the tape covering her mouth and screamed, "He has a gun, David!" Not wasting any time, Ava grabbed Johnny's hand and ran down the hall into the living room. The deafening sound of gunshots exploded in the living room, causing her to turn towards the kitchen instead. Going out the back door, Ava and Johnny emerged into the lawn, disoriented but alive. Looping back to the front of the house, Ava assumed their best chance would be regrouping with Sheriff David. The gunshots had stopped, leaving an eerie quiet draped over the cabin. Approaching the front of the cabin, Ava could see Sheriff David was laying in the lawn, clutching his chest. The sheriff turned his head towards Ava, and his eyes said everything that she needed to know. That he was sorry, that he tried, but she needed to run now. The thin man emerged from the door, with a sinister grin decorating his face. He raised the gun and pointed it towards Ava and Johnny. This would be their only chance to escape. She would just have to take the gamble. Picking up Johnny, she ran for the tree line. If they could take cover behind the trees, maybe they could lose him in the brush. The first shot went wide, completely missing the mark. Ava turned back to look as she was running and saw the thin man chasing after her. But his speed was hampered, and he moved in an odd, sluggish manner. Blood was dripping off his arm into the grass. He was wounded in the firefight with the sheriff, and he is most likely still half blind from the pepper spray. Sharp pain was radiating off her cut leg, but Ava was managing to outpace the thin man so far. The second shot went past her head and caused splinters of wood to explode from a nearby tree. Ava dipped behind it and sprinted towards the next tree, trying to create as many barriers as possible between them and the thin man. Each breath began to burn inside of Ava's chest. She could tell that the physical exertion was taking a toll. Putting down Johnny, she kneeled for a moment to catch her breath. Johnny pulled on her arm, forcing her to keep moving as they ran into the forest. Sheriff David had watched helplessly as Ava and the kid ran away from that psychopath. When he caught the round, he got knocked off his feet from the sudden force. He was struggling to catch his breath, and the pressure in his chest felt unbearable. Feeling at the spot he got shot, David could tell that his Kevlar had stopped the bullet. Looking at his hand, no blood appeared to be coming from it. So this meant one thing. He was having another heart attack. David had planned on retiring this month. This was a young man's game, and he was well past his prime. Now he was an old man laying on the ground, having a heart attack in the middle of a shootout. And the worst part was that helpless look Ava had when she saw him. Ava and that kid needed his help, but what could he do now? David radioed for backup, giving his location and condition between each painful breath. But it would most likely come from the police department the town over. It'd be too late by the time they arrived. Sheriff David struggled to his feet. It was painful but possible to move. It sounded so far away, but he could swear he heard a voice. It was a familiar voice that he had heard before, but it had been a long time. It called him Elijah, and then it dawned on him. It was his deceased mother's voice that called him now. The light burns low and darkness spreads, but our flame is not extinguished yet, not as long as your heart still beats in your chest. It was the last thing his mother had said to him at the hospital. The words hung heavy on him that day and every other day since she passed. Sheriff David moved towards the tree line. "I'm not extinguished yet," said David through clenched teeth. Ava could hear the heavy footsteps of the thin man coming near them. The moonlight was being blocked by the trees, making it almost impossible to see where he was coming from now. Ava and Johnny had found a dense honeysuckle bush and crawled inside it. It made for an excellent hiding spot, but the thin man appeared to be circling it. She was certain he had not seen them, but it was like he knew they were near. He was a wolf that had caught their scent, and nothing was going to take him off the trail now. The thin man fired around in the air and looked around the forest for movement. "I know you're here, and I'm going to teach you the word yet," yelled the thin man. "Can't you see you're forsaken? If I was supposed to be stopped, it would have happened. But here I am, still doing the work." One thing was now clear to Ava. He was not going to stop or give up. She was going to have to stop him. "Stay right here, don't move," whispered Ava to Johnny. Johnny shook his head and began to mount his complaint. "It's the only way we get out of this," responded Ava, before he could start. Johnny considered the words for a moment before nodding his head in acceptance. Even though he was just a child, he seemed to understand the situation just as well as Ava. Moving out from under the brush, Ava crawled to the side of a tree and attempted to conceal herself as much as possible. The straight razor she had used to cut herself free was the only weapon she had now. Wait for him to walk by, try and get the drop on him, maybe get lucky. It was not much of a plan, but it was the only one she had now. Ava prepared the razor in her hand, gripping the handle so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The thin man's footsteps grew louder with each passing moment. She closed her eyes, trying to hear him coming. Then she heard a twig snap next to her. This was it. Ava lunged towards him. He stumbled backwards from the shock. He had not considered the possibility that Ava could attack him. The straight razor cut across his face, clipping his right eye as it dragged through his flesh. He growled from the stinging slash and fired the gun in response. An explosion of sound caused Ava to fall back. The firearm was discharged next to her ear. The noise of the forest was replaced by the ringing sound that would not pass. Ava charged forward to press the attack, but was caught by the end of the pistol across her chin. Now that he had created some distance, he aimed the gun carefully towards her center mass. The thin man was not going to miss this time. Blood poured from his fresh laceration, and his right eye was shut. This caused him not to notice Sheriff David approaching him from his blind side. David raised his revolver quickly, seeing that Ava was seconds away from being shot. Ava closed her eyes and heard the thunderous boom of the gun. Opening her eyes revealed a different image than what she had expected. The thin man was holding his chest, sitting on the ground, unable to get up. The gunshot wound to his chest caused the thin man to gasp for air, taking in short, ineffective breaths. Looking to her side, she saw David, but he was on one knee, unable to continue the fight. The thin man's hand grabbed at the pistol laying on the ground, attempting to level it at David now. In one swift motion, Ava closed the distance and slashed at the thin man, again with the straight razor. The blade contacted the side of his neck, causing a torrent of blood to flow freely now. The only thing he could do was drop the gun and grab the wound to extend his life. Ava kicked away the gun to make sure it was no longer a threat. The thin man tried to get up from his sitting position, but his body would not respond. Instead, he fell onto his back, slowly bleeding out onto the forest leaves. David collapsed onto the ground as well, unable to keep himself upright any longer. Running to David, Ava began to inspect him for a wound, but couldn't find an injury. "What's wrong? What's going on?" said a confused Ava. In between short breaths, Sheriff David managed to spit out the words, "Heart attack." Although she was young, Ava had seen death before. When her grandma had passed, her name had slowly faded from her, leaving only the shell of what used to be. Ava's gift allowed her to see the name Elijah was fading from him. The bridge that connected his soul to the physical world was closing. Sheriff David was dying. Looking at Elijah, Ava suddenly felt that she could hold the name, reach out and touch it. Focusing her gift, Ava tried to keep the name there with them, in this world. Her mind recalled a conversation she had had with her grandma years ago. The first person to manifest the gift could see names too. She liked to remind Ava of that fact. No one else had been able to do it again until Ava. A bright light started to form over Elijah and grew brighter with each passing second. Ava was doing more than holding the name now. She was pulling it back into him. Names are more than a bridge that connect our souls to the physical world. They are the dreams and hopes of the past given to the next generation. I promise that things can be better in the future. A family name, or one chosen because of its beauty and elegance, have the power to change the world in the right hands. In his last moments, the thin man witnessed Ava's true gift. He was filled with hate and rage towards her. For the first and only time in his life, he felt small and unimportant. In his dying breath, he had learned that he was wrong about the world. Sheriff David woke up with Ava sitting over him. His chest pain had passed and he was able to get up off the ground. "What happened?" asked a confused Sheriff David. The paramedic insisted that he go to the hospital, even though as far as they could tell, his heart was fine. The strangest part was that his heartbeat was normal. The irregular heartbeat that had plagued him for years had cleared up on its own. David felt 10 years younger, and he knew somehow it was thanks to Ava. Johnny was reunited with his aunt and uncle, who was a town over. He felt bad for the kid losing his parents at such a young age. He could only imagine the years it would take to forget this trauma and have a normal life, if it was possible to forget this at all. Sheriff David had seen some strange things in his 30 years of law enforcement, but this one, it took the cake. How Ava knew about this man baffled the investigators. Ultimately, she told them that she just had a bad feeling talking to him, but he knew it was more than a hunch. At his mobile home, she knew Johnny was in danger, even knew his name somehow. Ava was special. David had no doubt about that now. However, it was not his place to share her ability with the world. If she wanted to remain anonymous, well, that was her business. The town of Polk, of course, gossiped about the event. How the cashier from the Marv's grocery store stopped a serial killer. And whispered in the Marv aisles was an even stranger story. That the young girl who worked at Marv's would visit the hospital on her days off. That the patients visited by this girl would suddenly make miraculous, unexplainable recoveries. Although the details changed between each telling of the story, one fact remained consistent. That the young girl knew the names of every person she met. If you enjoy these types of stories, consider checking out the video Lost Signal. It is one of my personal favorites. To stay up to date with news stories, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. Until next time.